who aren't yet sure if they should start a company or not. I've helped many people, including my own friends and family, think about this decision. And my intended audience for this talk is anyone who doesn't feel ready to start a startup today, but thinks they may want to one day in the future. I'm going to break down the topic of whether you should start a startup into two parts. First, we'll talk about which types of people seem best suited to being startup founders and help you figure out if you might be one of them. Second, we'll talk about how you might best prepare yourself for becoming a startup founder in the future. Let's start by helping you figure out if you're the kind of person who should become a startup founder or not. I really wish there were a simple test you could take that would give you a clear and correct answer to that question. I've now worked with almost 1,000 startup founders as a group partner at YC, and I still get surprised by which people take to startup life like a duck to water and which ones struggle to adapt. Now, you might find this surprising if your image of startups is based on the way famous founders are often depicted in books or movies. These depictions can make it seem that if you're not a ruthless, brilliant programmer like Mark Zuckerberg in the Social Network movie, or a charismatic product genius like Steve Jobs in one of the many books or movies about him, you probably aren't cut out to be a startup founder. Now, I can't deny that being a brilliant programmer or a charismatic product genius will certainly make it easier to be a successful startup founder. But I can say that after working with many successful founders, there are many more different types of people who succeed at startups with different strengths than just those stereotypes. As an investor, my job is to pick which people will make great startup founders. And yet, even after 15 years of starting and investing in startups, I still get surprised by who turns out to be a great startup founder. That means it's going to be hard for you to know for sure if you're suited to being one. You might think you could just look at how well someone has done in school or at work and assume success there will lead to success at startups. That's definitely what I thought when I first started working at YC in 2010 and began reading YC funding applications for the first time. After I started working with more startups though, I realized that these signals mattered much less than I'd expected they would. When you're working on a startup, you have to put in blood, sweat, and tears to convince even a single user to care about trying your product, let alone convincing the first 10 or 100. You have to push through a lot of rejection to get there. And because this is your startup, all of that rejection feels very personal in a way it doesn't when you're working at a fan company building a product for someone else. It takes a lot of resilience to make it through this initial struggle to get your early users. And that's the quality I think is most important for startup founders to have. Resilient people are suited to startups and should definitely become founders. But how do you know if you have enough resilience to be a startup founder? When I first started working at YC, I thought I could use confidence as a proxy for resilience. I'd assumed that if someone projected confidence, like speaking with conviction or being high energy, during our funding interviews, they were likely to be a resilient founder. The more founders I worked with though, the more I realized this was also wrong. It turned out that someone could appear very confident initially, but not be resilient when their startup hit roadblocks. Conversely, some of the quietest and least confident seeming founders at first turned out to be the most resilient founders I'd go on to work with, many eventually taking their companies public. This is Saji, the founder of Benchling. I met him when we funded Benchling in 2012. Benchling is now worth over $6 billion, and Saji has grown into a formidable founder and CEO. But I remember when we first interviewed him and his co-founder Corey. They were both softly spoken engineers, and we were all concerned they wouldn't be suited to working on Benchling, because Benchling's idea was to sell software to biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies to make money. And we weren't sure that they would be good at that kind of enterprise sales. This concern was shared by investors at Demo Day, who worried that they wouldn't be able to get those biotech or pharmaceutical companies to pay for the Benchling software, and Benchling struggled to raise very much seed funding at Demo Day. Sales did turn out to be a real struggle for Benchling. In fact, over a year after they'd graduated from YC, Benchling was still not making any revenue, though they did have some enthusiastic grad students as free users, and the product continued getting better. It took them almost another year, that's now 2 years after YC, to start doing sales and making any revenue. Now Benchling is on course to become a public company someday, and has many of the world's top biotech and pharmaceutical companies as customers. Looking back, I always had confidence that Saji was a good engineer, but I could not have predicted back when we funded him in 2012 that he would have the resilience to overcome that amount of rejection and transform himself into the leader of a company that took many years to become great at enterprise sales. But what I haven't shared with you are the stories of many other founders who seemed equally talented at first when we first funded their companies, but turned out not to have the same amount of resilience as these founders did. I've thought a lot about how to tell the difference between people who have this kind of startup resilience and those who don't. I've wondered if maybe having the right motivations or reasons to start a company mean you're more likely to have this special resilience. Over time though, I've decided that this also doesn't matter as much as I had thought. I think there are many perfectly legitimate motivations to start a company. For example, it's become popular to say that you shouldn't start a company just to make money. That's considered a somewhat flimsy motivation, but I actually think it's fine to start a startup to become rich. Startups are one of the few ways to make life-changing amounts of money in a relatively short period of time. If the desire to make money gets you started, then great, go for it. I also think that simply being curious about what it's like to found a startup is a fine initial motivation to start one. Actually doing a startup is the only way to know for sure if you'll enjoy it. The reason I have conviction that your initial motivations don't matter so much is that I've seen motivations change over time. I've seen founders who started out a company with a plan to sell it within a year, change their mind as they kept working in the company, and they're still working on that same startup a decade later and it's now a public company. This means that your initial motivations to start a startup aren't as important as what those motivations might change into over time. In order to keep working on a startup and keep going through those dark periods that every startup experiences, you need enduring motivations. And I think the best ones are to be genuinely interested in the problem you're working on and love the people you're working with. We'll talk more about finding those later. So, instead of introspecting too much on if you'll make a good startup founder, I'll offer some practical advice. If you are curious about what it'd be like to start a company, start by asking yourself, what do I have to lose? Now, I mean this question not as a rhetorical one, but as a very practical one. Figure out what the worst case scenario looks like if you started a startup and decide if you can live with that. It's probably going to take at least a year for you to have enough data to tell if the startup you're working on is promising enough to keep working on. In the worst case, you'll shut down the company without having earned much or any salary for that year. Can you live with that worst case? The calculus here is different for everyone. If you're about to graduate college, taking a year after graduating to work on a startup is not a big deal. Those job offers will still be waiting for you in a year. But if you've been a FANG employee for the past 9 years and you're in line for a big promotion this year, then maybe you stand to lose a lot by spending the next year working on a startup instead. Asking yourself if you can handle the worst case is the best way to know if you should start a startup. Be honest with yourself. If you can't actually handle the worst case, then your own constant anxiety will probably self-sabotage your startup efforts. When you're thinking about the worst case scenario of working on a startup, you should factor something else into the equation. You will learn a lot from starting a company. I don't think enough people factor in how valuable this learning is when they're doing their worst case scenario analysis. As a startup founder, you're responsible for making everything happen, and that means you get to do lots of different types of work. You'll have to do some amount of sales, product, and customer support all at once. This can be very clarifying in helping you figure out what type of work you enjoy and where you might want to focus your career, even if the startup doesn't work out. Some people start a company that doesn't work, and then they jump straight back into starting another one because they want to learn from their mistakes. Others decide they actually really enjoy specializing in doing one thing really well, and they join a company where they can do just that. The startup experience can really improve your career opportunities, even if the startup doesn't succeed. My second startup, TripleByte, used software to help companies identify and hire great people. I work with hundreds of employers as they search for the best talent, and I found that many of them were explicitly looking to hire people who had previous startup experience. They believed this showed evidence of being a self-starter and being able to take initiative and lead projects. Some of the most successful YC companies have actually built their hiring processes around this knowledge. Rippling, a $10 billion company founded by Parker Conrad, also a YC company, hires former founders and puts them in charge of entire product divisions.
Usually we love hiring former founders to run specific product lines and build them and really run them as general managers. We've been, really successful at recruiting. I think we have now probably around 50 former founders that work at Rippling.
At YC, we often see startup founders leave their startup if it doesn't work out and go on to join a more successful YC company. This is Nick Grandy. YC funded his first startup, Wonderbar, in 2008. That startup shut down, but he went on to join another YC company you may have heard of, Airbnb, as its first employee. That of course worked out great, and after many years at Airbnb, he left to start another YC company, OutSchool, which is now valued at over $3 billion. I share these stories to show how career progressions are not always perfectly linear. Introducing some serendipity and meeting smart, ambitious people can completely transform your career, and being a startup founder is a great way to do exactly that. Okay, so let's say you do decide you can live with the worst case of doing a startup, but you're not ready to do one right now. How can you best prepare yourself to start one in the future? To actually start a company, you'll want two things, an idea and a co-founder. Now, sometimes an idea and co-founder both come to you quickly and you're off to the races. There's lots of great startup content out there about how to start a company once you're ready. But let's talk about what to do if it will take you some time to get to that point. I'd start by encouraging you to not think of finding ideas and co-founders as two separate tasks. It's hard to think up good ideas yourself. Also, your ideas will start out being vague and fuzzy, more like a hunch or an impulse than a clearly formed idea. And you'll go through 7 iterations of fleshing it out into something more tangible and concrete. Having someone to talk through that initial idea or impulse with, and debate and discuss, is important, and the best person to do that with is your co-founder. I find my best ideas come to me during conversations with smart people. So I'd start by thinking about who do you know that you enjoy talking about ideas with. In college, these are often the people you'll go to when you're stuck on a hard problem, or they are the people you most enjoy working on group assignments with. At work, these are the colleagues who you find make you the most productive and help you do your best work. I'd seek these people out and start having conversations with them about ideas or technologies that you find interesting. Talk about products you use every day that you admire or are frustrated by. Talk about technologies you think are underrated today and why. Flesh your thoughts out and debate them. Spend the time between these conversations doing your own reading and research to learn more about the topics you find interesting. If you're a curious person, this will seem natural to you anyway. All of this primes your mind to more easily notice and think of potential startup ideas, and it helps you get to know your friends or colleagues better as potential co-founders. If you're struggling to think of people you enjoy talking about ideas with, then you probably need to change your environment and meet some new people. If you really want to start a company one day, it's best to choose an environment where you'll be around many people who might someday be your co-founder. I think the best environment for this is working at a startup. You both get to see how a startup works from the inside, and your colleagues will be less risk-averse than the average FANG employee. So if you're in college, I'd recommend finding a startup to work at after graduation. Or if you're at a FANG company now, think about leaving to join a startup as an intermediate step to starting your own someday. Once you're around smart people who you enjoy talking about ideas with, I'd recommend you start experimenting with turning these ideas into side projects. At some point during these conversations, you'll eventually say something like, it'd be cool if someone built X. And that's the moment to stop and think about how you could be the one to build X. Is there a simple first version you could build over a weekend? Or can you find other people who might be users and pitch them on the idea to see how they react? Keep pulling on this thread until you've come up with a plan to turn this idea into something real, however small it is. Right now, you're not trying to launch the next unicorn. You're just getting used to the experience of turning ideas into reality and experiencing the thrill of launching something. To turn your idea into something real, you'll need the skills to actually build them. If you're not a programmer, then either you'll need to learn how to program or find a co-founder who is a programmer. My advice, speaking from experience as someone who started his first startup without being able to code, is start learning to code. You only need to learn enough to build a version 1 of your ideas. Once you're around smart people and you're working on some side projects, how do you know when it's time to take the leap and quit your job to start a company? While it'd be great if one of your side projects started getting explosive traction and made the decision easy for you, you can't rely on that happening if you're serious about starting a company someday. Even if you launch your side projects and get some early users, the feedback you get will be mixed. It's not uncommon for the early users of any product to span the spectrum of being delighted, appalled, and indifferent towards a product. To judge how promising your side project is as a startup idea, I'd use some advice from my Y Combinator partner, Paul Buchheit. He says that it's better to make a product that a few people really love than one a lot of people are indifferent towards. If your side project elicits a deep reaction from someone, the kind where they can legitimately say they're doing something very differently as a result of your product existing, then you may be onto something. A single passionate user of a crude prototype that was hacked together in a weekend means so much more than a million signups on a waitlist for something that doesn't exist yet. My main advice to you would be to think less about how well your side projects are going and think more about how much you're enjoying the process of thinking up ideas and turning them into something real. Are you learning new things and finding yourself energized? Contrast this feeling with your day job. If you find your job is draining, but you have energy to work on your side projects on evenings and weekends, that's a sign it may be time to quit and work on your own ideas. Pay particular attention to how much you enjoy working with your side project collaborators. If you enjoy working with them and you both want to be startup founders, recognize how rare that is. Having a great co-founder who wants to do a startup is a fantastic reason to quit and start one. To finish, my advice is: 1. Don't worry too much about your initial motivations or reasons to start a company. Those can change over time. Simply being curious about the experience of starting a startup is enough to get going. Think about the worst case scenario if you did start a company, and be sure you can live with that. If you don't yet have an idea or co-founder, start looking around for smart people to talk about ideas with and launch some side projects with. Actually launch those side projects, however small, to get the experience of turning ideas into reality. And if you find someone you really enjoy working on side projects with, and you both want to start a company, make the jump. I really hope you do, and I hope we get to work together at Y Combinator someday. Thanks so much. Who aren't yet sure if they should start a company or not. I've helped many people, including my own friends and family.
We talk to so many young technical people, young technical founders and potential founders. We've become experts at career advice, and specifically big tech career advice,
into two parts.
Which I don't know about you, Dalton, it's not an expertise I ever wanted to develop at all.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked at a FANG. This is probably the last thing I'd be interested in talking about with people, but man, we get exposed to lots of this stuff.
And I think what's interesting is that technical founders often misunderstand the value they can get out of FANG. And misunderstand is an understatement. They grossly misunderstand what value they can extract from a FANG job and what value they can't extract. I think mostly because a lot of founders are mixed in with other people with different motivations, right? Most people want to be managers or employees. I think a lot of founders have friends who want to be managers, employees, and they kind of like see those people attracted to FANG, and then they assume all those things apply to them as well. Whereas, you know, as we both know, the founder path is quite different than the employee path.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when I was an undergrad, a lot of the recruiters, the people that had the most recruiters and the best recruiters, try to create cachet. I remember, you know, when I was in school, it was all around management consulting was the high status, cool jobs to get. And it was a certain kind of person that would like fall for that like working at McKinsey or Accenture or something was like the cool thing to do. And what's funny is at the time, Google was like an 80-person startup and they were trying to recruit on campus, but it was like,
nobody cared.
Do you want to be different? Like it was exactly the opposite brand of what Google is now, because there was this kind of a grubby little startup. But the point is, it's easy to look at folks that employ the most recruiters, and use that as your basis. Like whoever has the best booth at the career fair, whoever gives out the coolest stuff, and make your selection that way, right? If that's the criteria you use to select what college to go to, which is like, oh, whatever has the best rankings, you look at the best career rankings for where to work after college, and that's going to drive you towards, you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, right? It's not crazy. I get why this happens.
And if you want to be an employee or a manager in a large tech company, that's great. Like that's correct. In fact, I'd argue all those guides are written for you, and it makes sense to write guides for you because you're the vast majority of people. The problem is, what should the founders do? What should the potential founders do? What should the future founders do?
People that are curious, founder curious people, the people that might want to they're like, oh, I think that'd be cool. What's their move? Exactly.
So let's start with some of the assumptions that we hear from these potential / future founders about why working at FANG right out of college or soon thereafter makes sense. Why it's it's never presented to us as like it's a pretty good opportunity. It's always presented to me, at least, as like, oh, of course it's essential. It's an essential part of
they state a fact. They're stating facts.
It's like, we must work. So here's the first one we hear a lot. Before I start a company, I want to get experience working on the hardest technical problems at the largest scale. And FANG is the only place in the world to do this. What do you think, Dalton?
That's just quoting the recruiter. you're reading what the recruiter's line is. I mean, look, most people that get most jobs at FANGs, when you talk to them after they have the job, if they're, get a couple of beers in them, they're working on some bullshit ad server. They're working on like one pixel on one corner of one thing. They're working on some project that's going to get killed.
Yes.
Like, again, if you're someone that's like a good enough programmer to get hired to work on some deep technical infrastructure at Google, then this line is true. But most folks that I talk to, at least, kind of have what is like a shitty job, but that's been presented and branded to them as a very cool thing. And again, this is marketing. Like, they want you to take the job, they want you to keep the job, and someone's got to do all of the crappy ad server work, right? Someone's got to. And so if you actually look at the numbers, way more folks that you meet that work at a FANG job have the equivalent of like some shitty ad server, like buttons or translating it to foreign languages or something, just like the worst job.
Android settings page.
Then the people then the people that are working on the core search infrastructure at Google, which again, that actually sounds really cool. And that is working on hard technical problems at the largest scale. So I think you just want to be honest about what the job actually is and not just quote the recruiter.
Well, and let's be clear, the way that you actually learn what the job is you talk to someone doing it. You don't talk to the recruiter. Like, I think maybe people don't quite understand how the entire job of the recruiter and the number one way they get paid, promoted, everything is convincing you to sign up.
Yeah, they get comped per person. It's like a car salesman. They don't make money if they don't sell the car. If you don't sign on the dotted line, they're not getting paid.
The next one is, Dalton, and this is a little more vague. Like, it's going to be easier for me to be successful at my startup. I'm going to learn important lessons I can apply to my startup if I work for a while at FANG, right? Because the lessons I learned at a big company can directly apply to my early stage startup, right? Isn't that how it works?
Look, I think in some situations, folks that are really green can learn a lot about working on a team and having a manager, learning about how corporations work, learning about politics. It's a great way to learn about politics. But you'd be surprised at how many founders that we talk to will tell you that nothing they did in their job translates at all to their startup. Like, could not be less relevant versus their college coursework was more relevant. Isn't that weird? Like, and it's because in a lot of things you have so much tooling. Again, I'm talking about programmers here, but you have so much infrastructure inside of Google or Facebook to do your job, and they have their own way of doing code reviews. Like, there's just all this stuff. So when you start a startup and you have none of it and you're starting from scratch, you're like, wait, what happened to all those tools I was used to using in Bigtable and BigQuery and all, whatever you had.
Yes.
And you're dependent on those tools. And so it's a lot more like doing a college project again, where you kind of there's no tooling, there's no infrastructure. You have to create everything from scratch. And so again, what's funny is like, you learn a lot of stuff, but a lot of what you learn is how to use the tools of the FANG, which you don't get to use when you don't work there anymore. Get what I'm saying? Again, this is a very programmer-centric point, but like,
yes,
I've seen founders run into this problem a lot.
The way that I would say this slightly differently is that I think when you work on FANG, founders find that there's more they have to unlearn. Whereas like college wasn't actually set up to help them get products out in the wild, but it didn't give them a whole process that they can't use with their startup. Whereas like in many ways, the big companies give them a whole process that is just completely irrelevant from when you're doing a company. And so you have to unlearn. I've worked with so many Google engineers who are just like, their standard for getting a product into even beta at Google is 10x what an MVP in a startup is. And they just have to unlearn. It's like, can anyone find this useful? Launch. And I've had to fight with founders on that, where it's like, oh, well, this would never see the light of day at Google. And it's like, yeah, that's not the standard. Okay, here's another one, right? Well, the VCs, they care, right? Like a VC is good. Like, we all know that Google engineers can just raise a Series A, can raise $5 to $10 million, like with almost nothing, right? Like, this is my path to getting funded.
I mean, it depends on, certainly depending on your resume, it could be helpful, right? It's a good brand name to have. So I don't think that's false, but I think at some point, the more time you spend there, what was once a good positive signal could turn into a negative one. Again, I can't speak for all investors, but at some point you lose the shininess of getting that validation, as well as what team you're on and all this other good stuff. And so, I think there's some truth to that is what I'm saying, but like, if you stay there for 8 years, that doesn't apply anymore. You kind of have to get out to get the benefit of it.
I also think there's this weird feeling. I think people will read TechCrunch and see, oh, these Google people are getting funded, and then kind of assume VCs are like walking the halls, like being like, engineer, here's term sheet. The flow that you walk through to work to like go to MIT and be a CS major and then get employed at Facebook is nothing like the flow you'd walk through to go from a Facebook engineer to raising money. Like, these are not the same flow, and I think people really mistake those.
This is one of my big talking points to founders in the batch, which is you don't read about the unsuccessful fundraisers. And so if all you read is the successful fundraisers, it looks like everyone is raising and every Google engineer is raising and because we just never hear about the ones that didn't happen. And so don't fall for that. It's not that easy. You can't just wave a magic wand and they're not just handing out, we say this, they won't believe us, Michael, but like, I think people actually think they just hand out party favors or something, oh yeah, you worked at Google? Like, yeah. Isn't
there a special door at A16? You just walk in that door, present your Google credentials and money. Maybe not.
Well, that's the thing is there's a lot of Google employees and ex-Googlers now. Do the math. It doesn't pencil out.
Let's talk about the trap, right? So these are a lot of assumptions that future founders have. Let's talk about the other side. What's the company trying to do? right? And I think this is something that I hear a lot, where the company is trying to retain you. And trying is not the right word. The company has engineered and iterated a system over oftentimes a decade plus to retain you. And when you sign that piece of paper, you have to understand you're going into the same retention flow or retention flow built by a company that often is trying to retain users on its product. Like, it's really good.
Yeah, it's highly gamified. It's highly gamified.
Highly gamified.
Oh, I can get my next level, Michael. I want to get my next level upgrade, and then I unlock my booster pack, founder, blah blah blah, share reward, and then I get level 14. Like,
yeah. And one of the things that I see that founders don't realize is how the FANGs will do this around equity. So here's a story that founders will tell me, right? I'm going to get in with some kind of signing bonus. I'm going to feel good. Some kind of salary, I'm going to feel good. Some kind of equity package, I'm going to feel good. I'm well compensated. This is great. And then I'm going to get, but of course that equity is vesting over 4 years, right? Like, you earn that equity a little bit of time over 4 years. So that's the first part of the trap, right? It's like if you leave, you say goodbye to that money. The second part of the trap is that if you're good, 6 months in, you get another chunk of equity, but it's vesting over 4 years. So think about it. You've been there for 6 months, but there's disproportionately more money that you have invested yet, which incentivizes you to stay a little bit longer.
This is a dark pattern. It's a loss aversion, which is people do if you give someone something and then threaten to take it away, they will irrationally value it to avoid a loss. Versus they never had to begin with, they won't do it. Again, Google this, loss aversion is a thing. So there's a lot of stacked loss aversion around vesting.
Especially because founders will think of it as their savings. And this is the second part of the trap, right? You're around a lot of people who want to be employees and managers, not founders. Oftentimes they're upscaling their lifestyle. Nicer apartment, car, nicer vacation, because they want to be in this world. They're not looking to save money to start their company, right? And so the people around you start spending money, especially because they see that vesting equity as almost savings.
Imagine delivering
so bam,
an entire...
You're not saving money because you're going on Instagram vacations. Bam, you continue to get these little equity bonuses that vest over 4 years. If they can keep you spending your entire salary, and if they can keep the money that you haven't invested yet larger than the amount of money that you have in your savings by like 2 to 3x, you never leave. Like your brain like a rational human says, don't leave.
Yeah. And again, where's this coming from? We talk to these people and they're like, yeah, I hate my life, but this is the setup. Like, they explain this to us as like the reason they can't do the thing they want to do. It's kind of sad to talk to someone who's like, they lay all this stuff out for us and they're like, and therefore, I can never do a startup.
I could never do a startup. Yeah. And they're like 25, and it's like, and this is how the math works out. I can't. Yeah. I'm not free. I can't do it. In many ways, this is a defensive tactic to warehouse talent out of the fear that maybe someone else can use you in a way that can hurt the company. Whereas if they warehouse you on the Android setups team.
Yeah, think about it. It's like speculative science projects that get axed and that never ship. Like, I saw that Facebook built some kind of silicon. They built a chip, and then they were like, no, never mind. And like, they never shipped the thing that probably dozens of people spent years of their life on. I saw that PayPal had some kind of research lab. They just laid everyone off this week. Like, basically, if you're not on the core thing, you have no promises that your work will ever turn anything. And how bad does it feel to spend 5 or 6 years and just, oh yeah, we were in the Moonshots group. They decided not to do our thing. They shut down our group. That sucks.
And oftentimes that's the thing that got you to sign, right? That was the thing. Oh, like I would have never worked on the normal thing. It was the Moonshot. So if you're if you're technical and you feel like you're getting trapped here, Dalton, like, how do you know it's time to get out? Like, how do you know, like, okay, like, or even if you see a friend in this situation, how do you know it's time to tell them, like, hey, think about breaking out?
I think for the people that I talk to, which again, it's probably not a representative set of the average. It's probably the people that are more disgruntled. But to the extent that you have conversations where it's like talking to someone that's like an alcoholic and it's like, I got to stop drinking. Like, I can't do this anymore. Again, I'm not even trying to be funny, but it's like when someone's just like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm still doing it and I can't stop. I hate my life. Like if that sounds like you or your friend talking about your job at Facebook, that's probably a good sign you maybe shouldn't do it anymore. And the actual tactical thing you could do is keep your personal burn low so that you can do it and not get hooked on the money with all this gamification we talked about. And realize you can always come back. If you're a good programmer, and you leave in a nice way, no matter what happens to you, you can come back. There's actually not that much loss you have to take. And so versus the people that are like, no, this is cool, I like my life. Yeah, stay there, right? This message is not for you. But we all know these people that want to just like tell you their darkest secret, which is they wake up every day and they like dream of quitting. Like they have fantasies of quitting every day. Those are people that probably should quit.
And it's interesting because we're probably talking to like 1% of the developers at FANG companies. Like 1%. For like 99% of developers at FANG companies, irrelevant. This is not relevant.
Yeah, this is not for you. We're not trying to argue with you, right? We're just saying, though, if you know someone that's deeply unhappy because of decisions they're making, they can just make different decisions.
You can tell them that. You can break the spell. So to wrap up, right, like the FANG optimization, I think there's a couple kind of takeaways here. Like, I think the first one is that like, if you're technical and you want to be a founder, and you decide that FANG is the right part for you, the right path for you, at least to start, a couple of things you should be thinking about. One is how long you're going to stay, right? Like, how can you stay for long enough to get the value without getting trapped? Because if you get trapped, your plan goes to shit. It sounds like the second one, and you were touching on this, like, don't work on projects that will like make you hate your life, make you hate tech, like cause you to decide to just become like a nomad who roams like, you know, weird beaches in Southeast Asia. Like we know these people, like.
Yeah, like I know a lot of ex-Facebook people who kind of like feel that they did evil and they made money doing it and they seem pretty unhappy about it. They're not happy about the work that they did in the universe. And so, yeah, don't do that. Like the psychic scars of doing that stuff is expensive.
Well, and it'll prevent you from being optimistic about tech, which you need to be if you're going to be a startup founder. Like you need to be optimistic. I'd say the last one is have a plan at the start. Like know what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to get a visa. You're trying to save money. Are you trying to get this on your resume? Have a plan for what you're trying to accomplish by taking one of these jobs and a plan for when you want to leave. It's a lot easier to have a plan when you're not looking a bonus in the eye, right? If you come in with the plan, when the bonus thing happens, you'll see it coming. If you're fighting the bonus head to head with no plan, bonus wins most of the time. All right. I think notebooks are great